Art at BCHS with Madame Defoe presents How to Stretch Watercolor Paper Before You Paint on It. Gator board is sturdy, lightweight, and water resistant. It will keep our painting flat. Choose a piece of watercolor paper that is smaller than your gator board. You will also need a spray bottle with water and a clean sponge that is dedicated just for this purpose. A regular stapler that can open fully. A tray or shallow bin with 2 inches of water that is bigger than your watercolor paper. And lastly, a staple remover. I recommend this kind. If your watercolor paper fits inside a bin, make sure it's fully submerged and then wait 5 minutes to let it fully absorb the water. It becomes saturated. After 5 minutes, but don't wait too long, grab the paper by the corner and pull it out of the bin. Allow the excess water to drip off. Once it stops coming off in a steady stream, transfer it onto your gator board. To avoid air gaps and bubbles, roll the wet paper onto the gator board. Take your time. But what if your paper is too big to fit inside a bin? Well, here's another way you can do it. Lay your dry paper on the gator board and generously spritz it with water, and I mean like lots of water. Then grab 2 edges and turn the paper over. Make sure that it lays flat when it goes down. And take your spray bottle and spritz it generously on the second side. Wait 5 minutes for the water to be fully absorbed. If needed, you can use a clean, dedicated sponge to help pull out some of those air gaps that might be underneath. Don't rub your paper too much, or you start to mess with the components that make up the paper and it won't receive the paint as well. Now use the open stapler to attach the paper to the board while it's in this expanded, water-saturated state. Now press lightly because too much pressure will not only puncture your paper, but also the gator board underneath. Notice how close to the edge of the paper I put the staples in. This is because we're going to have to cut off that part at the end, so I don't want to waste more of the paper than I need. Start by stapling the 2 corners of one side, then into the middle. Then look at the space between the middle and the edge and put staples in there too. They should be about maybe 1 to 2 inches apart. Then do the same thing for the opposite side of that paper to really stretch it in that vertical direction. And then eventually you'll turn it over and do the opposite sides in the same fashion. Doing this helps reduce the buckling or cockling or bumping that can happen to your paper as it shrinks back when it's dry. And that's it. Now you're ready to paint. Now, of course, if you want to do the wet on dry technique, you'll want to let this paper dry fully. It should only take about 15 minutes. But if you want to do the wet on wet technique like I'm doing in this example, this is the perfect time, especially to do a big wash for your background. If you plan on sketching first, I recommend doing that with the paper dry. But you can always use those watercolor pencil crayons when the paper is wet. Now let's pretend I'm done. I need to let my painting fully dry. And then get your staple remover. Very carefully lift the staples to remove them. Be careful not to dent or wreck your painting itself. I find I get better success when I place the staple remover underneath the paper and lift from there instead of underneath the staple and lifting. You get better results when you're lifting from under the paper. Remove any staples that are still attached to the paper and dispose of them properly in the trash. Notice the small punctures that are left close to the edge where the staples were. If you plan on putting your painting behind a window mat, this is fine. Otherwise, we need to do something. Use the paper cutter to trim the very minimal amount of paper to get rid of those holes. And then, voila, your painting is done, unless you still need to iron it.